Quick introduction on myself. My name's Tom Shea. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Adgile Media Group. My talk today, crucial behavioral psychology principles. Quick background on myself. I went to Boston College, studied a bunch of things I actually didn't really like at all. Then went to a company called McMaster Car Supply Company, used those skills, and eventually got into machine learning search software, which is where I really discovered, I think, my love for behavioral psychology. So you can see when I got a second chance at doing education all over again at UChicago, I studied behavioral economics, statistics, and marketing, which are all things I do like. And that prompted me to start a company called Adgile Media Group, which is in the out-of-home space. And as I will quickly introduce, is built almost exclusively around behavioral psychology concepts. So my talk today, crucial behavioral psychology principles. If you think about my business, so we are the leader in last mile delivery truck advertising. We take last mile delivery trucks traveling the densest urban areas and turn them into mobile billboards on behalf of consumer brands, which seems like a simple business on the surface. There's an interesting back-end technology. I was told I'm not supposed to pitch, so I won't. But the reason this business works so well is rooted in behavioral psychology. So interestingly, we did a long-form behavioral psych study on this. 96.3% of people who see branded trucks believe they are delivering on behalf of the advertised for brand. And so that's interesting, right? When you buy a billboard, everyone knows you paid for an ad. When you buy a taxi top, everyone knows when you paid for an ad. But when Athletic Greens wraps 20 trucks, people are going, oh my God, everyone must be ordering Athletic Greens. And because there's a measurement element to our business, we're able to actually prove that in the data. We took our business, which previously served all categories, and simplified it to only focus on consumer, where this effect is strongest. So I changed the title of my talk because we need to add some psychology and flair here. So instead of crucial behavioral psychology principles, this is now going to be called What Colonoscopies Can Teach Us About Marketing. So this is a bridge version of a talk I gave a couple years ago. So I picked three essentially behavioral psychology concepts that we're going to talk about today. It starts very simple, anchoring bias, everyone's heard that, then gets sort of medium and then advanced. So I think the reason I want to talk about principles as opposed to best practices is sort of a thesis that I have that by the time a best practice is known as a best practice and you can find it in its ranking on SEO, it's probably too late. And so something that I think is a bit more valuable is understanding these principles and how human mind and cognitive biases work such that you can continue to use them regardless of which way the marketing winds might be flowing. So this is a fun one. The anchoring bias, it's humans' tendency to rely most heavily on the first pieces of information we receive. If you look at the right here, this is a pretty hilarious example. You ask someone the last two digits of their social security number, and then you ask them to bid on a product, and you can see the impact on the left. The person whose social security ends with 09 is willing to bid a lower number than the person whose social security ends with 86 is willing to bid a higher number. So this is a really strong bias. Again, a simple one to start here. And the origin is actually very interesting. If you look at where this was discovered, it was in a mathematical equation where they gave two sample populations the same math problem presented differently. As you can see here, 1 times 2 times 3 versus 8 times 7 times 6, and said, you have 10 seconds, guess what the answer to this equation is. And you can see the folks who were given the ascending number guessed 512. The people who were given in a descending equation were given 2.2 thousand. They were all hilariously wrong. It's 40,000. But as you can see, the reason that's true is when you only have a finite period of time, your brain's trying to quickly make sense of a lot of confusion. You're looking at the first pieces of information you have. And 1 times 2 times 3 is 6, whereas 8 times 7 times 6 is 336. So what are the applications? These are ones you've probably seen before, but knowing we're going to index most heavily to the first piece of information we're given, there's ways you can sort of use or exploit this cognitive bias in your favor as a brand. So the first, we rely most heavily on the price to determine the perceived value of a product and what it's actually worth. So here you can see an example. I think this is from Columbia's website. The primary anchor they're using is discounting. So they're taking something that was MSRP at $60 and discounting it to $34.99. And then they're following up with a secondary anchor, which is their social proof. So you can see the ratings. If you go to Obvi's website, actually, you guys do this quite well. So there's a good built-in example here. Something to know as you're thinking about this bias, though, it can backfire if there's a ridiculous gap between the MSRP and discount. So those are things you sort of got to strike a balance between. Another good example of this, I believe this is subscription to The Guardian. One way you can sort of lean into this is offering a suggestion or a nudge. So having a default response reduces the cognitive load on someone's brain. People's brains don't want to work that hard, as it turns out. And so giving them sort of a baseline default response reduces the cognitive load, and it also sort of insinuates that this is the popular, correct response for someone to be taking in this context. So people generally tend to conform to it. So obviously, anchor high. Lastly, the application for anchoring bias here is if you're displaying multiple price points, always list the most expensive plan first, because that is what people will anchor to, and everything else will feel appealing by comparison. As you can see here, there's a premium option, and then there's the we recommend. Obviously, people are looking at that and saying, oh my God, this is actually a pretty good deal. There's actually not that much different on the bottom in terms of what's being offered here. Okay, second one, service recovery paradox. So this gets a little bit more advanced, but I also think it gets a little bit more fun. Customer service recovery paradox is a very interesting concept whereby if Black Friday, Cyber Monday is coming up, which is actually a great time. Sometimes people make mistakes, a coupon leak or something big a bad email goes out to a lot of clients. Well, there's a really interesting behavioral psychology lesson whereby if you fail or do something by mistake and recover gracefully and promptly, the customer's perception of your brand will actually land at a place that's higher than if you did not have any failure whatsoever. So what's an example of that? Or how to think about this, right? So this is a fun one. Weizhi, which is a Chinese word for crisis, consists of danger and opportunity. If you were to look at the characters individually, and your response dictates which results in this scenario. So everyone knows we're not going to be perfect 100% of the time, and if we hold that to be a universally accepted truth, then understanding how best to respond can turn a negative situation into a positive. So Graza olive oil, this happened end of last year. They essentially ran out of product. It put a ton of delays into all of their holiday deliveries. People were buying these as gifts, all these nice care packages and stuff, and things went completely south. They weren't able to deliver on any of this. And so they took the stance of, hey, we're actually going to get in front of it and issue an apology, and we're going to make it extremely sincere, not like, hey, here's a link to our website to go pre-order or buy. It was just a sincere apology. And not only did that work for them and get a ton of business for them and make it feel like there's actually a human on the other side of these businesses, which is sometimes, you forget that people are just like us trying to run these businesses, and they got a ton of awesome free press, as you can see on the right here. Now, the question, and I remember asking this question, is can we arbitrage that? Can we just intentionally screw up the first engagement with every consumer and then just run that back and see if we can profit off of it? Unfortunately, the answer is no, and this sort of explains why. So there's three factors that play into the customer service recovery paradox: scale, stability, and control. So scale has to do with how dramatic is the problem, and when you're thinking of ways to recover, the scale is probably going to impact what you're going to offer, whether it's compensation or how apologetic you're really going to be. In Graza's case, screwed up Christmas or Hanukkah for a lot of people. So you can sort of think of it, okay, that's a little bit more dramatic than, we sent out an email with some punctuation errors or something minor like that. Stability is a customer's inference about whether similar failures are likely to occur in the future. So it's sort of like a reputational thing. Is this something that they keep getting in front of and apologizing for, and now there's a pattern here, and you actually don't trust any of the things they're saying, which is why this isn't really scalable. And then control, whether a customer perceives that the business could have prevented this issue from occurring. So given what happened, is it something they logically could have gotten in front of had they had a more mature operation or were a bit more professional in how they handled it? Lastly, peak end effect. This is probably my favorite of all time. It traverses business, but can be applicable even to your dating life, which is what I think it's sort of a fun one. And the peak end effect is a concept where your remembrance of an experience, whether good or bad, is the average between the peak and the end of that experience. And that can be a positive or negative thing. So if you look back on a vacation or something, you're generally remembering the most intense emotional element and the final element of that trip. So here's an example. You go to Disney World with your children. It's a really high peak. Your children meet Mickey. You feel like a good parent. All's well. Really high middle peak. The issue is the end is not just you leaving the park. It's screaming babies on flights, lots of laundry, emails. The peak is really low. So if you were to think about a bar graph, you have a really high peak and a really strong low peak. So what did they do about it to solve this? What's the business application that we have here? Disney World implemented those RFID trackers, and then they used those to take pictures of you and your family around the park unbeknownst to yourself, and then follow up 2 weeks later with a scrapbook to those customers so that the actual end element that they remember from Disney is not the laundry, not the screaming babies, not the emails. It's actually the scrapbook, in which changes a negative peak into a positive peak. The remembrance of the experience, the reviews of the experience, the revenue that resulted was material. And I think this has lessons in like everything. You can think of like a TikTok ad. Okay, is the hook or is the peak really strong? And is the last element what you want them to remember? I think about this when I'm giving presentations. I think about when I'm doing interviews. Pretty much every part of my life, I'm always thinking about this peak end effect. And you're probably wondering, when are we going to talk about colonoscopies? Time to talk about how they figured out about the peak end effect. So we talked about high peaks. There are also negative peaks. So colonoscopies, very uncomfortable experience. You have a wire moving around your body for about 10 minutes. No one's having a good time. And essentially, what they were able to test and figure out, the hypothesis group was a normal colonoscopy. You can see patient A here in the pain intensity scales. Just negative all around. The hypothesis group that they made was, we're gonna like triple the length of a colonoscopy, but for the last 20 minutes, we're gonna get the wire to the edge of the orifice, and we're not gonna move it around anymore. It's just gonna sit there for an extra 20 minutes. And if you actually look at what resulted, people's experience, though patient B technically should have had more pain, it's a longer procedure, their memory of it is significantly less pain. And the reviews of that procedure and everything that followed actually made it such that colonoscopies are now artificially longer for no reason. So hopefully a pretty memorable one for you guys, and find ways to weave it into your daily life. If you want to learn more about this, Richard Thaler was my professor at UChicago. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on a book called Nudge. Great audiobook. It's a lot of these concepts, but more like macro scale, like how do we solve poverty by creating inertia in decision making. And if you're trying to dive even deeper, his work is built on Herbert Simons and Daniel Kahneman's. If you want to learn more. Thank you guys. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me here, and that's it.